Tonight on Ukraine Today. Not such a peace process after all. Ukraine has delivered its response to the Trump administration regarding the US peace plan. Meanwhile, Trump's statements are sounding more and more like Putin's rhetoric. The people's position. New US polls show that most Americans actually support increasing aid to Ukraine. A historic Ukrainian strike. For the first time ever, Ukraine hit Russian oil extraction infrastructure in the Caspian Sea. Hellish aftermath of Russian attack. Massive fires broke out at several Ukrainian energy facilities. All that and more, right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit like button, and let's jump into the news. We start with a historic event. Well, more or less historic. Ukraine's security service used naval drones to hit a Russian oil platform in the Caspian Sea. Oil and gas extraction from more than 20 wells has been stopped. This is the first time Ukraine has struck Russian oil production infrastructure in the Caspian Sea. Also, the Sea Baby naval drones hit a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker called the Shan in the Black Sea. The ship was sailing under the flag of the Comoros Islands and was inside Ukraine's exclusive economic zone. After the strike, the tanker suffered critical damage. President Zelensky confirmed the combat use of Ukrainian ballistic missiles against Russian strategic targets. What kind of missiles were used and how far did they go? Details up next.
Sapsan in action. Ukrainian armed forces have begun using domestically produced ballistic missiles to strike enemy targets. The exact specifications of the Sapsan missile are not disclosed, but its deployment by Ukrainian forces will allow them to hit enemy targets, possibly even more effectively than with the use of ATAC EMS. Ukrainian missiles have twice the explosive power, fly faster, and have a much greater range.
The exceptional advantage of using the Sapsan operational tactical complex is that it can be used to strike targets both on the territory of the Russian Federation, primarily on Russian territory, and against legitimate military targets in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This is an exclusive sovereign right of the Ukrainian side itself.
In addition to the Sapsan, the Ukrainian army is using several other domestically produced missiles against the aggressor country. This was stated by the President of Ukraine.
This shows that the Ukrainian side, despite the intensity of strikes on its military-industrial enterprises, has managed not only to preserve its defense industry infrastructure, but also to expand and scale up the production of its own strike weapons. This indicates A, the presence of qualified engineering personnel, and B, sufficient funding for Ukrainian defense industry enterprises, which are capable of scaling up the production of Ukrainian-made strike weapons. Virtually all Ukrainian strike weapons consist exclusively of Ukrainian-made components.
Let us recall that in September of this year, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine is actively developing long-range weaponry. He said that the tests were successful and the next stage is the launch of mass production. Earlier, Ukraine began production of Flamingo cruise missiles with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. On Friday, December 5th, the company Firepoint delivered another batch of cruise missiles to the Ukrainian military. Also in November, the armed forces of Ukraine attacked important targets on Russian territory. Long Neptune missiles were used for the strikes. Another of the most important developments has been drone missiles such as Palyanitsia, Peklo, Ruta, and Bars.
The Ukrainian side is ready to scale up and deploy its own strike capabilities across the territory of the Russian Federation. This referred to the Sapsan and accordingly the Flamingo. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have scaled up the production of strike drones with a target range of over 1,500 kilometers.
The armed forces of Ukraine are successfully striking military targets in the Russian Federation, and oil refineries are also in the crosshairs of drone systems.
It was precisely the use of Ukrainian strike capabilities that has effectively blocked the operation of about 40% of Russian oil refineries. According to the Russian side itself, losses to the Russian budget are estimated at around $100 billion. But it should be noted that the Ukrainian side does not intend to stop at the results already achieved.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used at the front. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased by dozens of times. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create innovations in the defense industry and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
Starting next year, the Ukrainian defense industry and Ukraine's defense forces will receive Ukrainian ballistic missiles with a target range of about 800 kilometers. It should be noted that the manufacturing company claims to have developed 2 ballistic missiles with a range of up to 200 and respectively up to 800 kilometers.
All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weapons that destroy important enemy military targets deep behind the lines.
Fire, everyone!
Last night, the Russian city of Veliki Novgorod came under a Ukrainian strike. The attack triggered a massive fire at an industrial facility. Monitoring channels say the target was the Akron chemical plant. Among other things, it produces ammonium nitrate, a key ingredient for explosives. So this is an absolutely legitimate target. There were also loud explosions in Russia's Smolensk region. Drones likely hit the Dorogobush chemical plant. And in Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport, the carpet plan was introduced, meaning a temporary ban of takeoffs and landings. Ukraine's 7th Air Assault Corps showed how our units fought off a Russian mechanized assault on Pokrovsk. Columns of Russian troops tried to break through from the south into the northern part of the city, and instead lost vehicles and personnel. More about the frontline situation in our story.
Siversk has not been captured, although the situation in the city is difficult. The Operational Command East has denied Russian fake reports about the capture of the city. In turn, the project reported that Russian occupation forces have intensified their attempts to advance in the Siversk area of Donetsk region. According to experts, the enemy continues to amass infantry near the settlement. The situation also remains difficult in the Pokrovsk area. However, our command reports that the situation has nevertheless improved. The Russian advance has slowed significantly and the enemy has lost part of its logistical routes.
The maneuvers carried out by our fighters, which stabilized the front, including getting out of a difficult situation near Suky Yar and Lysivka, have now leveled the front line. Today it is clear that the Russians have not managed to achieve any major changes, despite the enormous efforts the enemy is making to try to advance both in the city center and accordingly into the northern districts of Pokrovsk. However, they have not succeeded in doing so.
At the same time, a number of analysts report the effective encirclement of neighboring Minohrad. According to open sources, the defense forces did have to abandon some positions. However, the occupiers have still not managed to close the encirclement and therefore there is no cauldron.
The situation being observed cannot be called a classic encirclement because there is no firm Russian military control over the territory north of Myrnohrad, military analyst Kirilo Mikhailov told the agency. Movement in both directions is still possible, but it comes with risks.
Kupiansk. The successes of the Ukrainian armed forces there have reached such proportions that even the ZDWA correspondents cannot help but acknowledge them. In particular, it is reported that Russian troops in the city have already been cut off from the crossing over the Oskol River, located to the north, through which supplies are supplied.
This raises the question, how did Gerasimov's report on the capture of Kupiansk affect the situation? Usually such things have the most negative consequences. After lying to the higher-ups, the command on the ground is forced to make reality match the reports, regardless of losses or reasonable necessity.
On the contrary, the Ukrainian command does acknowledge some Russian successes in the Kharkiv region, particularly in Vovchansk.
In Vovchansk, the enemy also managed to advance a little further, and given the extensive ruins that Vovchansk itself is tragically in today, that's quite quite obvious and understandable. I assume that most likely the pressure in this direction may be increased. However, Russian losses today, and let's say the Russian units present in this direction, have become somewhat exhausted.
Meanwhile, in the south of the country, the front has finally been stabilized. The alarming news that had been coming from positions in Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk in recent weeks seems to have come to an end. The reserves that arrived in these directions accomplished their task and pinned down the Russian assault units.
Today, Ukrainian defense forces managed to improve their tactical positions on the Zaporizhzhia front and in Dnipropetrovsk. We are not naming the locations today, but our forces have made some advances. Accordingly, these counter-attacking actions are producing this result. The Russian army is losing momentum. However, we still expect them to reinforce with reserves.
At the same time, analysts note that in recent months, amid Russia's desperate assaults, more and more videos are appearing online from Russian positions, where they openly talk about the price paid to take control of this or that forest belt.
There's no rotation, no food. We drink from puddles once every 3 days. Water doesn't get through, food doesn't get through. The guys are dying. In just a month, more than 50 people have been killed or wounded. People, if you hear this video or know about it, help us. They're sending us to slaughter. The commanders don't even consider us human.
Well, maybe this will finally reach those who are still thinking about joining the ranks of the Russian armed forces, because Russian contract soldiers simply have no other future.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is the time to subscribe, like this video and share it so more people can see it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Over the past 24 hours alone, Russia lost at least 1,460 soldiers killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that brings the total to 1,185,080 Russian soldiers. In just past day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 7 Russian armored vehicles, 23 artillery systems and dozens of other enemy assets. Emergency crews showed the hellish aftermath of the Russian strike on energy facilities in the Poltava region. Direct hits and falling debris caused massive fires across several locations in the Kremenchuk district. Ukraine has delivered its official response to the Trump administration regarding the US peace plan. Journalist Borak Ravid of Axios reports this. A reminder, all this happened as Trump insisted that Ukraine hold presidential elections. His words sound more and more like Putin's rhetoric. What's going on there? Meanwhile, the European Union stated that Zelensky is the democratically elected and legitimate president of Ukraine.
The 47th president of the superpower United States has once again spouted nonsense. In a new interview with Politico, Donald Trump not only surprised with his knowledge of geography, but also with his open pandering to Russian demands. This is not the first time Trump has voiced the wish for presidential elections to be held in Ukraine. Moreover, this issue was raised right at the beginning of the 45-minute interview.
Yes, that's what I think. A lot of time has passed and things aren't really going well. Yes, I believe the time has come. I think now is an important moment to hold elections. They're using the war as an excuse not to hold elections, but I think the Ukrainian people should have that choice. And maybe Zelensky would. But they haven't had elections for a very long time. You know, they talk about democracy, but at some point it stops being a democracy.
In fact, analysts say that Donald Trump played into the hands of the Russian dictator Putin, who constantly accuses the Ukrainian authorities of being illegitimate. The Kremlin has repeatedly demanded that Kyiv hold elections. According to Moscow, only then is there someone to sign ceasefire documents with. In Moscow's version, there is someone to sign ceasefire documents with. At the moment, the Russians, through American envoys, are only pushing a capitulation plan. The question about elections caught Volodymyr Zelensky in the UK between meetings with partners. The Ukrainian president admitted to journalists that he is ready to amend national legislation and hold elections during martial law in the country, on the condition that the Americans and Europeans provide the necessary security for this. Why
is Trump threatening us with elections, but Putin is not? Again, we are ready for elections. Why should we be afraid of them? And you, Donald Trump, guarantee that not a single missile will land here. Can you guarantee that while the elections are taking place, no one will attack us? Or will 30,000 people have to sit in basements for a week or even two because Russia is shelling us? Look at the train station in Fastiv. The states say we held elections during the war. Well, yes, when the war was in Europe and Britain. On their own territory, when there was a war, the states never held any elections.
According to analysts, the issue of security is the most important one that the Ukrainian authorities should raise with their partners. In addition, how can transparency of the will of the people be ensured not only under constant shelling, but also in conditions of power outages? In Europe, they were quick to remind Trump that he is forgetting the context, while in Brussels, they understand what Russia is doing right next to them.
We have already drawn attention to this issue because these are exceptional times now. In my opinion, President Zelensky is a democratically elected leader, and any elections should take place when the conditions allow for it.
Analysts note that for Donald Trump, this is the last real chance to jump on the bandwagon and force Kyiv to sign an agreement with Moscow.
Right now is the last moment when all the active politicians are on vacation, but starting from January, it will already be a marathon race heading straight for the finish line in the fall. In other words, there won't really be a summer break. No one will have time for that. Ukraine only comes up in between news about someone being trampled in a supermarket on Black Friday and say the lighting of the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center. Trump is trying to squeeze as much as possible out of December and prevent this issue from resurfacing in January when journalists and politicians return. And in January, Trump will start to be forced into a narrow set of actions.
In fact, according to experts, Ukrainians need to hold out until the election race fully engulfs politicians across the ocean. And only then might issues of aid and a just peace find more support.
President Volodymyr Zelensky commented on the situation. In his evening address, he said,
I spoke with representatives of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. We discussed everything in detail. I will not allow any speculation against Ukraine. If our partners, including our key partner in Washington, talk so much and so specifically about elections in Ukraine, elections under the legal regime of martial law, then we have to give clear and legal Ukrainian answers to every question and every doubt. It's not easy, though. The pressure on this issue is something we absolutely do not need. I expect the members of Parliament of Ukraine to offer their vision. Security challenges depend on our partners, on America first of all. Political and legal challenges must get answers from Ukraine. And they will. Glory to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, US polls show that most Americans support increasing aid to Ukraine. In other words, they don't like Trump's course. And the Senate also opposes several controversial decisions of the current president. Here are the details.
Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, in dozens of cities across the United States, mass demonstrations took place against the peace plan proposed by Washington, which, according to participants, effectively legitimizes Russian aggression and forces Ukraine to accept Moscow's terms. The American political establishment, which opposes Trump's policies, also joined the mass protests. For example, in Chicago, Congressman Michael Quigley joined the protests.
When authoritarian regimes try to erase an entire people, the world has no right to remain silent. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past, and we cannot allow Trump to force Ukraine to accept a false peace dictated by Moscow.
Americans are very dissatisfied with Trump's policy toward Ukraine. If the 47th President of the United States began his second term in office with the support of 47% of the population, then due to the peace agreement, or more precisely, the effective capitulation of Ukraine, which the White House is trying to force Zelensky to sign, Trump's approval rating has dropped to a historic low. It's not just ordinary Americans who are dissatisfied with the peace plan. The agreement has sparked significant resistance in the Senate from both Republicans and Democrats.
Putin has spent the entire year trying to make President Trump look like a fool. If administration officials are more concerned with appeasing Putin than achieving real peace, then the president should find new advisors.
This capitulation agreement is unacceptable for America, for Europe, and for Ukraine. It was written by Putin and benefits only him.
Trump constantly threatens that the US will withdraw from the negotiations if a peace agreement is not signed in the near future. But in reality, he can't actually do this at least until the midterm elections in the US, the elections for the House of Representatives and the Senate in November 2026, because his approval rating is falling and his support is declining, which means Trump won't dare to anger voters even more.
He has already damaged his relationship with part of his own audience, the so-called MAGA movement leaders, because of the Epstein Files case and the scandals surrounding their publication. Accordingly, if he now announces that he is completely washing his hands of Ukraine and forgetting about it, he will ruin his relationship with conservative Republicans, traditional conservative Republicans, who, although they remain silent, still have quite a significant influence within his own party.
Trump wants peace agreements and wants all the glory to go to him. And anything that doesn't bring him personal benefit doesn't interest the president. In turn, Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated in a recent interview that he holds a pro-Ukrainian position in the negotiations and assured that Ukraine has good prospects and that a peace agreement will not be signed without security guarantees.
Theoretically, if everything is done right, in 10 years Ukraine's GDP could surpass Russia's GDP. The following things are needed: stop the war, make sure they are never invaded or attacked again, protect Ukraine's long-term sovereignty and independence, and ensure they do not become a puppet state. They are truly independent and sovereign, allowing their economy not just to recover, but to thrive and turn it into a story of prosperity.
Ordinary Americans are taking to the streets in protest, and senators and congressmen are already openly expressing their disagreement with a peace deal. Even Trump's closest circle is against making concessions to Moscow. Meanwhile, the 47th president is talking about the need to hold elections in Ukraine. But if he doesn't listen to those around him, he himself might not make it to the end of his presidential term in the US.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.